You just play around with some sliders, see if it's working. After spending some hours, decided to give up because it just feels overwhelming.
This is Mudit, and he has a secret. You see, Mudit is an experienced photographer and also one of my subscribers. But despite the experience, like many photographers, he finds photo editing overwhelming because he doesn't know what these sliders do. But today we will change this. Today I have invited Mudit for a one on one photo editing session where I will explain basics like editing sliders, tone curve, and color grading in detail. We will also discuss why professional photographers love texture, why selling presets is a scam, and what separates really good photographers from the rest. So let's go.
I started photography back in 2005, but in the last 5 years, haven't done much of photography, and I thought it's good time to pick up camera and start afresh.
Photo editing is a very big part of photography, right? But the problem is nobody talks about sliders. This is something I had a problem with when I was starting out. I used to enjoy editing very much, but I didn't know what the sliders did. I didn't know what the contrast was for. I didn't know. I was not sure about exposure, highlights, shadows, blacks, whites, and all that. This is a common problem. What do you think?
Yeah, I've also used Picasa in the past. I've downloaded Photoshop after spending some hours, decided to give up because it just feels overwhelming. You just play around with some sliders, see if it's working. Cool. If it doesn't work, then you give up both on the editing as well as the
Yeah,
photography sometimes.
for sure, for sure.
In Picasa, to be honest, I've used the sliders, but as Tushar mentioned, right, these sliders were predominantly looking more at the photos than understanding what they are doing. A lot of these sliders look familiar, but yeah, you don't really know what happens behind the scenes, how it works, and what is the difference between these sliders, right? So yeah, let's dive in.
So we will take the Lightroom Classic as the editing software, and we will basically go through all the basic sliders in Lightroom, right? And I guess these sliders are very common to other editing softwares as well. So if you are using other editing softwares like even Lightroom CC or maybe Picasa in Udit's case, or although nobody use Picasa nowadays,
Yeah, I won't stop.
yeah, and although or any other photo editing software, and all these sliders work in the same way. We are going to talk about basic sliders, so we will start with exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, and all this, and then we will talk about later in the video. We will talk about color mixers, what color grading is, and then in the end we will talk about color profiles, especially Adobe color profiles, right? So this is Lightroom Classic, and as you can see on the left side, you have this photo, and I use this photo as an example, right? So on the left, you have this photo. On the right, you have all these basic sliders. So I can let's start with exposure, contrast, and although first, because I believe that in order to understand white balance, temperature tint, and later on, you need to have a basic understanding of what these basic sliders are. So exposure is basically, and feel free to ask any questions, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So exposure is basically you have exposure in camera, right, where you increase or decrease aperture or shutter speed, and basically to bring in more or less light, right? But this is not that exposure. Here in editing terms, exposure is simply the brightness in the photo. So if I make this exposure go on the right, the brightness increases. If I bring this to the left, the photo goes more darker, right? So I'm decreasing the brightness in the photo. If I bring it to the extreme left, obviously we will have almost black photo, right? So this is the exposure. Now every photo, so let's try to increase the exposure a bit, not too much, but a bit. In order to understand the contrast, let's talk about the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks first. So when you take a photo, every photo has some light parts and some dark parts. Like leave the photo is aside. Even when you are walking around in a city, you can see that there are somewhere there's sunlight and then there's somewhere there are shadows, right? And basically we take photos of what we see. So obviously the photos also will have some dark parts and some light parts, right? Shadows and highlights. Highlights are basically the lighter parts of the image, except the whites. And the shadows are the darker parts of the image, except the blacks. So when we change highlights, we are basically making changes in the lighter parts of the image, but we don't impact the pure white areas. When we change anything in the shadows, we are changing the darker parts of the image, except the pure black areas.
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, if I increase the highlights here, you can you can see that the lighter parts of the image are becoming more light, especially the sky and the water. Right. If I bring it to the left, you will see that they become more dark. Right. Or they, the light decreases somewhere, but only in the lighter parts of the image. Similarly, if I increase the shadow, you can see that it starts removing shadows from the darker parts of the image. If I bring the shadows to the left, it increases the shadows or the effect of shadows to the darker parts of the image, only the darker parts of the image, right? You take a photo, every photo has some noise within it, right? And a lot of details also, right? So that's why we have separate sliders for whites and blacks, because editing softwares give us control to specially modify only the white parts or only the black parts so that we can save those details, right? That's why you don't have only one slider for highlights and whites, or only one slider for blacks and shadows, because you need to understand and save those details. So when I said that in highlights, it only impacts the lighter parts of the image, but except the whites, that whites are now modified by the whites slider. So the name is very convenient, I guess, right? And the blacks slider basically impacts only the pure black areas of the photo. So if I increase the blacks, you can see that some of the more pure black areas becoming lighter. If I go to the left, they become even more blue, right? Similarly with whites. If I go to the right, the whiteness just increases on the white parts. If I go to the left, it becomes the white parts especially become more dark. What do you feel about this? Like, do you have any questions, or do you feel it's fair, or does it give you more control?
Yeah. I think this is very new to me. To be honest, I did not understand the difference and like connection between highlights and whites
Mm,
and shadows and blacks. So I think this gives a very different perspective.
mm,
Especially like I can now think of photos where like photos typically when you click them in dark or like after
mhm.
evening in the night,
Exactly.
you will need to kind of visualize like exactly what do you want, and these
Yeah,
are
right.
the filters where you can play and
Yeah,
figure out.
exactly. Now, this is interesting when you talk about, different times of the day when you take a photo to, for highlights and shadows, because this is exactly what contrast is for. Basically, when you increase contrast, you are making the lighter parts of the image more light and darker parts of the image more dark. If I move the contrast to the right, you can see that the lighter parts of the image are lighter and darker parts of the image are more darker. Conversely, if I move it to the left, now we get a more flatter photo. The photo becomes more flat because the lighter parts of the image are now not much lighter, and similarly the darker parts of the photo are less dark. Right. So contrast is basically, either you can understand it like this, or contrast is basically the difference between the intensity of light and dark parts of the image. Some people want the more cinematic photo, so they go for flatter photos. So they basically decrease contrast. Now, a lot of social media photos now, they say that pop your photos. What they do is basically they also try to, among other things, they try to increase contrast. So that's why they are increasing the intensity of lightness and light and dark parts of the photo. That's why it pops, right? So if you want a more cinematic feel, uh, decrease the contrast. If you want your photos to pop, you can increase the contrast, right? And we have a lot of people passing through. It's a very busy day today. And we are working from a cafe, and you can see, or maybe if I have not edited this video correctly, you can still hear a lot of noise behind me. So yeah, now every photo has a lot of details, right? All these details are spread across the lighter and darker parts of the photo, right? So now In order to control these details and how you can see these details, we have texture and clarity. Texture basically changes the intensity of the details in the mid range. So if I increase the, let's zoom in on the mom's face. If I increase the texture, you can see a lot of different marks and blemishes appearing because these are on the mid range, right? Professional photographers love texture because they use it to basically, what they do is they bring it down so you have smooth image. And whether we like it or not, people need to look beautiful, especially when you're doing portrait photography. And smoothness is appreciated in this world. So a lot of professional photographers bring the texture slider down to make the skin smoother. Now we were recording before, and Mudit, basically, do you want to talk about the expression on the face and how it?
Yeah, yeah.
You asked a
So
really good question at that time.
yeah, yeah, I remember. So basically, what I wanted to understand is that some photographers, especially when they shoot on streets or uh, they want to capture the emotion of the subject, they probably do not flatten out the face or smoothen out the face because that is what they want to communicate, the expression, what's the soul behind this person,
Yeah.
right? So I was just inquiring, like, for those kind of photographs, you would not want to use texture, but smoothening texture also is probably used in, as Tushar mentioned, in portrait photography, where the model or the subject is used across different platforms for different
Yeah.
labels, poster stickers, because there's a lot of focus on it.
Let me give you a very real life example. Let's say you are shooting for a skincare brand. You would want your model to look perfect, right? With very smooth skin. And these are the beauty standards of today, whether we like it or not, to be honest. Uh, it's not for me to judge.
Yeah.
So as a photographer, I'm told by the brand to, I want smooth skin. I will make that happen, right? Now, the expressions on the face they come out by posing. You need to create moments. You need to pose the model in a way that you give expression. But when you talk about sharpness of the photo, right? That is something you can control with either clarity or sharpness, right? So you can still have a very sharp photo even with smooth skin. So for example, here I can increase clarity and I have smooth skin and just focus on the mom's face. So I've increased clarity and I still have smooth skin, but I still have a lot of details on the face, right?
Like you can see the uh, wrinkles on
Yeah.
her forehead,
Obviously, we will.
the smile.
Exactly. Now, wrinkles are obviously if you are taking family photo shoot or you're taking brand photo shoot, obviously wrinkles are not appreciated, but you can always remove them. Right now, nowadays you have such powerful, remove tools that you won't even know that it was there. Right. So let's come to dehaze. Now, dehaze basically, the way I know it, right? Dehaze basically lets you remove any fog or haze in a photo, right? Personally, I use Dehaze sometimes, not always, but Dehaze is very powerful. So if you have if you move it to the right, you will immediately have darker photo. If you move it to the left, you will have a flatter photo with bright or
This looks like
exposure.
dreamy photo, right? Like
Exactly.
straight out of.
Yeah. So if I move it to the left, you will have less contrast, but a bit dreamy and a lot of blown out highlights. The thing is, do you see a common theme between texture, clarity, and dehaze? Like when I started to look at all these things, I did not notice in the beginning, but there is something going on. So all of them play with contrast, right? Even if I move the dehaze, you can see that if I move it to the left, it becomes less contrast. The contrast decreases. If I move it to the right, the contrast decreases. So all of these detailing sliders basically they play with contrast, right? In fact, all of the above sliders, except I would say exposure, they play with contrast. They change contrast in some way, right? Maybe they change a part of the photo. Maybe they change more, the complete photo. But in their own way, they are playing with contrast. That's why you have tone curve. Now, whatever you can do with these sliders, you can do all of this with this tone curve. So when you look at this tone curve, you look at it from left to right. So now as I go from left to right, look at what happens. Shadows, darks, or pure blacks. Then we have lights, perfect exposure. Then we have highlights, right? And all that. So lights you can also understand as whites, pure whites, right? And then at zero you have perfect exposure. So when you use tone curve, so for example, if let me reset all of this. So let me go back and simply reset all of this. Right. Right. So this was our original photo. Now, if I on the highlights, if I increase highlights on the tone curve, you can see the highlights have increased. Right. If I go down and I can also increase the lighter parts of the photo. Right. Similarly, on the darks and in the shadows, I can even decrease the shadows or make them more prominent. I can also increase them so it becomes more flat, but we have more light and all that, right?
One question. So
Mm.
here the highlight shadows, lights and darks, are they also in theory same as the highlight shadow whites and blacks that we saw above? Okay, because here it uses lights and darks, and there we used, I think, whites and blacks.
When we say lights and darks, the difference between the lights and darks in tone curve and the whites and blacks is that the tone curve also takes into account the mid tones. That's why you use tone curve. Professional photographers generally use tone curve and not the sliders because tone curve gives you better control,
Mm.
right? So with the tone curve, you can actually make changes on the mid tones as well.
Mm.
But that's not the case with the sliders.
Got
With
it.
sliders, you have limited capability,
Okay.
right? Now, all of these highlights, shadows, darks, blacks, whites, and all of this play with contrast, but it also introduces or increases or decreases light
Mm.
in the image, maybe in some parts of the image, maybe in all of the image, right? But the photo has much more than just light. It also has colors. And then colors also have shades, light or dark. So this brings us to the next part, which is color mixer and color grading. You see, in color mixer, it allows you to manipulate these colors in the photo, right? So you have 8 colors and you can basically change the hue, saturation, and luminance, right? But before I talk about all of these, there is something that we missed earlier, which is saturation and vibrance, right? Now, when we want to change or modify colors, the first thing, obviously, like the exposure. In exposure, we increase or decrease the intensity of the light, right? Similarly, saturation increases or decreases the intensity of the color, right? So if I increase saturation, you will see green becomes more green, blue becomes more blue, right? Similarly, if I bring the saturation down to the left, in fact, I get a black and white photo because I'm basically saying that I want to decrease any color to zero or negative, right? -100 in this case. But then there is a difference between saturation and vibrance, right? The thing is, vibrance only impacts the least prominent colors of the photo, right? So instead of impacting the whole image, it will only impact shades of colors, right, which are least prominent. So if I increase vibrance here, you can see that all of this has become blue,
Mm.
right? But if I bring down the vibrance and increase saturation, now it has become different shades of green, but not blue.
Mm.
So basically, vibrance impacts the different, it impacts the least prominent shades of colors in the photo.
I think one thing that I did not quite gather is that when you were increasing the vibrance and saturation, does it like have Like specific colors, or it just for the entire photo, it will increase the.
Saturation does that for the entire photo.
Okay.
Again, so saturation increases or decreases the intensity of all colors in the photo, right? Whereas vibrance only impacts the least common colors in the photo or least prominent.
So prominence in terms of the photo, right? Like
Yeah.
not like a different color. Let's say I keep a red flag somewhere, that does not matter.
No, no, no.
Mm.
In terms of the shades of the colors. So for again, let's look at this. So if I increase saturation, you will see that the blue of the water becomes more blue, and it's a consistent blue, right? It's the same shade of blue across the whole water. But if I bring saturation down and if I increase vibrance, now you can see we different shades of blue in water.
Yeah, and even the white part has become more white and
Yeah.
light.
So now vibrance decides to increase different least prominent shades of blue in the same water, right? It does
Yes.
not understand it's the same color,
Got it. Got it. Okay.
right? Now we are clear on color mixer, right? Right. So there are colors in the photo, right? But we also know that we have highlight, shadows, and midtones. So the all professional editing softwares give us a chance to make this highlights or shadows colorful, right? So we can make all the highlights blue, we can make all the highlights red, or we can make all the shadows blue, right? So this is called color grading. That's why you see that the photos of professional photographers in on Instagram or whatever, they look really nice because they have mastered the art of color grading. Color grading is what separates average photographers to really good ones, and color grading is that next level. So what people do is they basically add colors to highlight, shadows, and midtones. So for example, I want all my shadows, for example, to be red. So if I move this point on the circle to red, you see that all the shadows are now reddish in color. Not too red, but reddish. Now I can increase the luminance.
Then it
Of
will
this red.
become a lot red.
Yes. Then we also have two other more other sliders, blending and balance. This means we are trying to smoothen this transition between highlights and shadows so that they blend nicely, and the photos, they are balanced. So basically, when I increase blending, it becomes this might not so let's increase blending, and you will see that the red blends in with the with the shadows a lot, with the highlights a lot nicely. Now similarly, I can go to, I'm not a fan of this UI, by the way. It's very frustrating. Now you can see blending does not change because it applies to the complete photo. Blending means I want highlights, midtones, and shadows to be blended together with the value 80. That's why if I increase blending, this works across highlights, shadows, and midtones together, right? So now if I want my highlights to, let's say, be, what is your favorite color?
Just pick any green, maybe.
Green. So if I pick green, so now all the highlights are now green in color, right? But you can see that how they are blending together. The shadows and highlights are blending a bit smoothly because our blending value is 80.
Same is the case with balance, right? Even balance has to be maintained across highlights and shadows.
It basically works across to give a more balanced, right? Now the next part is detail. Now detail basically has sharpness and denoise, right? Obviously, if you increase sharpness or clarity too much, it's not considered a good practice because it looks a bit fake, it looks a bit more in your face and high contrast. It does not look real, right? Now I think before our recording went wrong, you asked something about when to use these sliders, how to when. So what was your question?
Yeah, so what I wanted to understand is like oftentimes we see these sliders, we understand now that I know about it. I will probably play around it. But do you have some recommendation as to when typically you should touch highlights, when you should touch contrast? Like just a thumb rule to begin with for people like me who have not used sliders? Where should we start? Which photos we should sharpen? What kind of things we should look? Whether this photo requires sharpness or not?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a very good question. Something that I also struggled with when I started doing photography and photo editing. Um, there are two things you can do. First thing is obviously how you have shot the photo. So, for example, today is a very beautiful day. We have a lot of sunlight, and usually when you shoot in a condition like this, you get blown out highlights. And let's say you take a photo of your wife. You're traveling somewhere, it's very sunny. So a lot of times you hear your wife complain that, I can't see my face in the photo because it's too much light on my face. What basically she is saying that you have blown out the highlights or there's too much shadow on my face because, so in that case, if you're editing a photo, then obviously you will bring down the highlights if you are overblown highlights, or you will reduce shadows so that you can see a white space. Whatever editing we are doing, we are basically trying to bring out the details in a way that looks pleasing to the eye. Right. So the first step to know what you should do with the sliders is to correct the photo.
Yes.
Right. If you have overblown highlights, bring highlights down. If you have too much shadows, reduce the shadows and all that. Then it becomes a matter of your style. If you want a more cinematic photo, you can basically reduce contrast, get a flat image, then you can color grade it, become have a more cinematic photo, or you can use any preset or filter, right? In if you are on mobile, or you can use presets, custom presets, or you can make your own presets. And if you want your photo to pop, then obviously you can increase the contrast and add a bit more saturation or vibrance or make your photos pop a little. Not probably not too much because then it looks fake, but that's how you can do it.
Got it. So even in classic, you can save presets.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can. I think I I want to make another video about how to create your own preset and how to save it and use it again and again. But yes, you can make your own custom preset and you can use it. In fact, it literally never buy presets from a photographer. That is a scam. It only takes literally 2 minutes to create a preset.
Maybe one suggestion for your next video is just like obviously create a preset, but also give some background as to what this preset will work best with. Like which photos will this preset work with? Will it work with like photos clicked in dawn, photos clicked in dusk, photos in a
Okay.
party setting, photos in a closed setting, photos in a summer party,
Right.
etc. Right? Like swimming pool.
Yeah,
And that will be very interesting for me to try out,
for
right?
sure. But I have a solution for you right now.
Hmm.
Right? So we talked about all of this, right? Now we also talked about when to use these sliders, right? And now we also have talked about presets and presets for different times of the day and different occasions. But if you look at this, now is the right time to talk about color profiles.
Hmm.
Right. So Adobe basically it's not a preset because when you add a preset, it changes the sliders.
Okay.
But Adobe actually gives you a way cooler option. So if you basically change any of these color profiles, it basically changes the photo without impacting the sliders. Right. And I made a video about this previous. So I made a video about adaptive color profile. Right. So here it is. So it only works on raw images, by the way. When I choose adaptive color profile, see what happens. Right. So this is adapt. It takes a time. A lot of things are going wrong today, but one more thing. Okay. So this is adaptive color profile, right? And if I go back to Adobe Color, this was Adobe. You can see adaptive color profile now, right? This photo is a lot better than the previous one. It's highlighted properly. It's much more better exposed. We have a lot of details also, and you can see the sliders are not impacted.
So is this an intelligent,
Yes,
like one-click option that Adobe does?
exactly. So this is a automatic photo correction tool.
Got it.
What Adobe is saying that I will basically bring your photo at a point where you can start editing it.
Ah,
I
so
will
this is that.
correct your the lighting in your photo in a way that you can now start editing it and you don't waste time in correcting the photo. But so actually, if you have shot the photo very nicely, the adaptive color profile does a really, really good job. You won't even have to edit it sometimes. So
This is like an auto adjust.
it basically, yes, but it's not auto. When you use auto, so let's go back to Adobe Color. And when you use auto, see what happens. The sliders move.
Got it. Got it.
But if I go back and choose adaptive color, what it does is it runs AI in the background, analyzes the photo, and only edits the parts of the photo which have gone wrong. So so for every photo, the adaptive color profile is different. It's customized edit without actually impacting the sliders. This is a really cool thing, right? And now you can basically change, the settings and create your own preset. Now, when we talk about, I will also create a video, next video of a preset. But now that you have a photo, let's say you have a photo, you can also talk about temperature, right? So you might have seen a very popular thing, and everybody loves is that summer autumn look. So basically, what you do is you increase the warmth in your photo.
Yeah, I used to play with
Right.
warmth a lot
Right.
in Picasa days.
Doesn't it look better
Yeah,
already?
it looks like one of those analog photos that you used to click like in
Yeah.
1960s.
Kodak camera or film.
Yeah, yeah,
And then if I go to the right, it increases the coolness of your photo,
yeah,
or it makes the photo a bit more bluish. This is much more popular with night photos when you want to make it more cinematic. So this is the temperature and warmth and cool temperature.
So in night photos, you're saying you can increase the temperature.
You can increase the temperature in any photo.
No, but how will it help in the night photos, like photos clicked in the night?
I mean, your lights would look more blue. You will get a much more filmy look, more cinematic.
Understood.
That's why.
Yeah.
And some people even go beyond that. They introduce grain in the photo so that it looks like we have shot from a film camera.
Yeah.
Then you have a blue orange combination with grain, right?
And then you add a reel, like photo reel.
Exactly.
Add some, black color on the borders,
Yeah.
vintage or whatever
Yeah.
it's called.
We come to the last part now. And this is white balance, right? So white balance basically color balances your photo properly. But a lot of people actually don't know how to use white balance, right? So what you do is basically you click on this dropper, bring it to the photo, and you want to pick the most neutral color in the photo, right? So let's say you pick this one, right? So what it does is it balances the colors in your photo according to the neutral shade that you have picked, right? So let me go back and maybe decrease undo it, right? So now I'm on Adobe color. Now if I do white balance, I take the dropper, right, and I try to select the most neutral shade, which for me I think it's white, and there you go. Now it changes the color balance of your photo according to the most neutral shade that you have picked. It balances the photo around the color that you have picked so that all the colors look balanced.
So let's pick another color, maybe the green
Yeah,
color
yeah.
of the grass. Let's
So-
see what happens.
So let's say I pick white balance and I choose green, right?
Yeah.
So what it does is it basically changes the hue, contrast, and the tones of the photo. Let me say this way. It it basically changes the tones of the photo in complementing to the color that you have chosen. That's why you have to choose the most neutral color because the neutral color does not have too many complementary colors. But because we picked green now, one of the complementary colors of green is purple or violet. That's why you see a purple or violet tinge. But if I go ahead and choose white, for example, now you get a much more balanced look because there are no complementary colors of white, maybe black, right? That's all. Do you think that you are now much more confident in using sliders?
Yeah, definitely. I think this help at least to begin with, right? Like at least now when I touch a slider, I know what it will do. It's not no longer hit and run.
Yeah.
I think it's more about understanding what you really want to change.
Yeah.
It's a different challenge and a problem. I think when you don't know whether it's worth. Does this photo require any edits or not?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think at least now after you touch a photo, at least you know what this will do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the next level will be to understand, okay, which photos really need editing, what is required to be edited.
For sure, for sure. Right. Even if you use sliders properly, I mean, you will see your photography increase by at least 50%. I don't guarantee because it basically depends on you, but obviously you will see a big increase in the level of your photography. Because everyone can take photos, even people are not taking really good photos with mobile phones and all that. But basically, what separates a really good photographer from the rest is how you edit photos.
Yeah, I think editing, especially in today's world, right, where sharing has become so easy
Yeah.
and you can showcase your skills. I
Yeah.
think both, in my view, carry equal weightage,
Yeah.
capturing a good moment and plus
Yeah.
also showcasing how that moment was good
Yeah.
from your lens, right? So the point that you made about photographer, right? Like you can click multiple photos, but the same photo can be clicked by 10 photographers, and each photographer will have a different view,
Perspective, yeah.
a different vision to what he wants to
Exactly.
communicate with that.
Yeah.
So,
That's great.
yeah,
Thank you, Mudit. First, thank you so much for your time. It's really nice to connect with someone who is watching your videos or who subscribe to the channel. Mudit was kind enough to tell me that, and really it gives a lot of confidence. So don't wait, subscribe to the channel because I bring a lot of different content like this, tutorials basically. Also, do let me know for this video if you feel that this video was helpful. Did you know what the sliders did in the beginning, or is it always good to know the basics, right? So let me know what you think. So yeah, so thank you for watching, and I wish you a really good day. Thank you, Mudit, for connecting.
thank you, Tushar. Have a nice
See you
day.
next time. Bye.
Bye.